Here is what nobody will say on television tonight. The United States just walked into a trap of its own construction, and the person holding the exit is not in Tehran. He is not in Beijing. He is sitting in Tel Aviv. Let me walk you through precisely how this unfolded and why the entire planet is about to absorb a cost that Washington never calculated for. If this is the kind of analysis you have been searching for, the kind that actually traces the connections others refuse to draw, hit subscribe right now, because what follows goes considerably deeper than anything appearing on cable news tonight. Picture the scene. It is Sunday morning. America's vice president has just completed 21 hours of negotiations inside a hotel in Islamabad with Iranian counterparts. 21 hours, nearly a full day of direct engagement. The most substantive diplomatic exchange between Washington and Tehran since 1979, and it produced absolutely nothing, not a partial framework, not a preliminary understanding, not even a joint statement, nothing. Within hours of that collapse, Donald Trump appeared on Fox News and declared that the United States Navy would establish a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the very same waterway he had spent 6 weeks publicly demanding Iran reopen. He is now sealing it further himself. Pause and sit with that for a moment. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Trump wants it open. His chosen response to Iran not opening it is to close it further with his own naval forces. That is not a strategic calculation. That is a leader constructing a room around himself and discarding the only key. But here is the detail the cameras completely missed, and this is the piece that reframes everything else. The Islamabad negotiations did not collapse because Iran walked away. They collapsed because the American delegation entered that room carrying demands that were never structured to produce an agreement. They were structured to produce a breakdown. Here is the evidence. Vice President Vance sat across from Iran's parliamentary leadership for 21 hours, and throughout the overwhelming majority of those hours, he pressed a single demand above all others: the complete dismantlement of Iran's uranium enrichment program, every centrifuge, every gram of enriched material surrendered directly to the United States. Consider what that demand actually represents. Iran has conducted uranium enrichment legally under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for decades. The 2015 agreement capped enrichment at 3.5%. International monitors confirmed full Iranian compliance. The arrangement was functioning, then Trump dismantled it during his first term, and now he dispatches his vice president to seek terms more extreme than the agreement he personally destroyed. Ask yourself one direct question: whose agenda does this demand actually serve? Reopening the Strait of Hormuz that serves American interests, reducing energy prices ahead of midterm elections that serves American interests, halting the economic deterioration that serves American interests, completely eliminating Iranian enrichment capacity that is an Israeli priority, not an American one. Israeli leadership has stated publicly and repeatedly over more than a decade that they would prefer a sanctioned, isolated Iran they can strike militarily over a stable, integrated Iran they cannot control. Israeli military figures said this openly before the 2015 agreement. They favored sustained maximum pressure over a functioning diplomatic arrangement. That identical posture walked into the Serena Hotel in Islamabad wearing an American suit, carrying an American passport, and advancing Israeli strategic objectives. And while Vance was inside that hotel attempting to construct an off-ramp, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu stepped in front of cameras and stated plainly that the campaign against Iran was not finished. Read that carefully. The American vice president is inside a negotiating room working toward a resolution. America's closest regional ally is simultaneously on television arguing the conflict must continue. It deteriorates further. Throughout the duration of those talks, Israel continued its military campaign in Lebanon. Hundreds killed, residential buildings destroyed, civilians buried beneath collapsed structures. Iran had submitted a written precondition before negotiations began: a full regional ceasefire, including Lebanon, before any agreement could take shape. In plain terms, Iran said, "Stop the bombing or there is no deal." Israel continued bombing. The talks fell apart. Trump assigned blame to Tehran. These negotiations were not lost. They were deliberately undermined, and the source of that undermining was not Tehran. It was Tel Aviv. Now let us examine the blockade itself, because before it has even been fully implemented, a fundamental contradiction has already emerged within Trump's own administration regarding what this blockade actually constitutes. Trump appeared on Fox News and described it in his own words as all in, complete, total, all or nothing. His own military command issued an entirely different characterization. Central Command clarified that the blockade would exclusively target vessels entering and departing Iranian ports. Ships bound for Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the way would move freely. So which version is reality? A comprehensive blockade or a narrowly targeted one aimed solely at Iranian maritime traffic? The president states one position, his military states another, and nobody across the entire international community, apparently including the American government itself, can answer what this blockade actually is. That is not a policy, that is disorder wearing military vocabulary. Here are 5 structural reasons this blockade was failing before it began. These are not political opinions. They are structural realities that do not adjust themselves based on what any leader posts online. Reason 1: this blockade damages America more than Iran. Iran has operated beneath American sanctions for 47 years, longer than the majority of people watching this have been alive. Sanctions did not fracture Iran. 6 weeks of sustained bombardment did not fracture Iran. A naval blockade will not fracture Iran. Meanwhile, oil prices surged past $140 per barrel the moment Trump's announcement landed. Energy analysts are projecting a combined shortfall of 11 million barrels daily from global markets. American consumer confidence simultaneously dropped to its lowest recorded point in the entire history of the University of Michigan survey. Not since 2008, not since the pandemic, the lowest figure ever documented, and that measurement was captured before the blockade commenced. Iran's parliamentary leadership responded by publishing photographs of fuel station pricing near the White House alongside a single observation that Americans would soon look back fondly. On $4 gasoline, in any contest of economic endurance, the participant who has trained for 47 years defeats the participant who has never trained at all. Reason 2: America is entirely without allies. Trump suggested the United Kingdom would contribute minesweepers to support the operation. London declined. Australia's Prime Minister stated his government was never consulted, describing it as a unilateral American decision. NATO has not endorsed it. The European Union has not endorsed it. Not a single Gulf state has committed vessels or logistical support. Meanwhile, Britain is quietly assembling a separate coalition, more than 40 nations constructing an independent diplomatic pathway to reopen the strait, 40 countries coordinating around American policy, 0 countries coordinating with it. That is not global leadership, that is strategic isolation. Reason 3: China has already exposed the bluff. This development, largely buried beneath Islamabad headlines, fundamentally alters the entire equation. China's defense minister issued a public statement confirming that Chinese commercial and naval vessels would continue transiting the Strait of Hormuz, that China would honor its existing energy agreements with Iran, and that outside powers should refrain from interfering in bilateral arrangements. Translated from diplomatic language into plain speech, China informed Washington that its ships were passing through and invited America to respond accordingly. Those Chinese vessels are settling Iranian transit fees in yuan, not dollars, yuan. The financial architecture underpinning this region is being reconstructed in real time, and the dollar is not its foundation. American intelligence has simultaneously confirmed that China is preparing delivery of advanced air defense systems to Iran. The same category of shoulder-fired anti-aircraft weapons that brought down an American F-15 during this conflict. Trump confirmed this himself at a press briefing. Connect those points directly. China is equipping Iran with weapons eliminating American pilots. China is sailing vessels through waters Trump claims to control, and China's defense minister is publicly inviting a response. When a Chinese-flagged tanker approaches the blockade line, the U.S. Navy faces 3 options: board it and risk direct military confrontation with the world's second-largest naval power, sink it and commit an act of war against a nuclear-armed state, or permit it through and confirm the blockade as theater rather than policy. And consider the precedent being established. If the United States asserts the legal right to blockade an international strait, Beijing will apply that identical precedent to Taiwan. Washington would be personally constructing the strategic and legal framework for the single outcome it has spent 7 decades working to prevent. Reason for Iran holds escalation options Washington cannot neutralize. Iranian military leadership has publicly referenced substantial untapped leverage. That language is not rhetorical decoration. Iran's allied forces in Yemen control the Bab el Mandeb Strait, the southern gateway to the Red Sea, carrying 12 to 15%. of all global commerce. If Hormuz closes, Tehran makes one call, the Red Sea closes alongside it. Two critical maritime choke points sealed simultaneously. Oil does not merely become expensive, it vanishes from accessible markets. Food supply chains fracture across multiple continents. The global economy does not enter recession, it enters something considerably worse. Reason 5. The blockade's primary beneficiary is Moscow. Russian oil does not transit Hormuz. Every barrel trapped inside the Persian Gulf represents a barrel the world must source elsewhere. That replacement supply comes from Russia. Before this conflict began, Russian energy revenues were declining. The Kremlin was preparing domestic budget reductions. Then the war commenced. Russian oil tax receipts doubled to $9 billion within a single month. This blockade accelerates that trajectory further, and Trump simultaneously lifted sanctions on Russian oil during this same period to moderate global prices, meaning Russia now sells greater volumes at elevated prices with explicit American authorization. The nation whose satellite intelligence assisted Iran in targeting American aircraft is being financially rewarded by the administration claiming victory in this conflict. So what is actually driving this decision? Because this blockade has nothing to do with strategy, it is entirely about psychology. Trump dispatched his vice president to negotiate. Israeli demands destroyed the talks. Iran refused to capitulate, and a man who has constructed his entire political identity around winning, around dominance, around the unshakable conviction that no adversary can outlast his pressure, just absorbed a deeply public diplomatic humiliation on the world stage. On Fox News Sunday, Trump stated that he could eliminate Iran's entire energy infrastructure within a single day, within 1 hour. He then suggested that what remained afterward would be the civilian water supply, which he described as devastating to target. The President of the United States is openly discussing the deliberate destruction of civilian water infrastructure on live national television. On that same day, he published artificially generated imagery depicting himself as Jesus Christ across his social media platforms. This while his own American-born Pope is characterizing this conflict as morally indefensible, while 3 American cardinals condemned his conduct publicly on a major news program, while American pilots are being shot down over Iranian territory. This is not a commander executing a coherent operational plan. This is a man who has lost his grip on a situation that has exceeded his capacity to manage it, and who is cycling through whatever language sounds sufficiently powerful to conceal that reality from his audience. The blockade is not a deliberate escalation, it is an emotional reaction to diplomatic failure, and throughout the documented history of great powers, emotional reactions during active conflicts are precisely the mechanism through which empires generate the catastrophic miscalculations they spend subsequent generations attempting to reverse. Now let me give you 3 specific predictions, stated plainly, with a timeline attached. Prediction 1. This blockade dissolves within 45 days. Fuel prices across America climb toward $6 per gallon. Republican legislators facing midterm electoral pressure begin breaking with the president in public statements. And Trump, who evaluates every outcome exclusively through economic performance metrics, engineers a declaration of victory and quietly dismantles the blockade without extracting a single meaningful concession from Iran in exchange. The retreat will be dressed as triumph. The scorecard will tell a different story. Prediction 2. Within 3 weeks, a Chinese-flagged vessel approaches and crosses the blockade line. The United States Navy stands down. That single moment broadcast simultaneously to every government and military establishment on the planet permanently establishes that America's blockade is unenforceable against any actor possessing the resolve to test it openly. The queue of nations prepared to follow forms immediately afterward. The demonstration will not require repetition. Prediction 3. 6 months from now, when the immediate noise has subsided and serious accounting begins, the documented record will confirm that this blockade accomplished the precise opposite of every publicly stated objective. Iran emerged from the pressure with a stronger negotiating position than it entered with. America emerged more isolated than at any point in recent regional history. Energy prices did not decline. They rose substantially, and the pathway toward concluding this conflict did not shorten. It became structurally more difficult to navigate. Now consider the overarching pattern, because the pattern is ultimately the story being written here. Every significant move America has executed throughout this conflict has followed an identical arc. Action designed to generate leverage. leverage that instead generates compounding cost absorbed by American consumers, American military personnel, and American credibility on the international stage. This war financially enriched Russia, the attempted ceasefire strategically empowered Iran, the Islamabad negotiations exposed, with uncomfortable clarity, who genuinely directs American foreign policy decisions in this region, and the blockade will deliver a lesson to the watching world that American power operates within limits, and that those limits can be located by any actor with sufficient patience and resolve to apply sustained pressure against them. There exists a version of American power that commanded genuine international respect. It was not assembled through ultimatums delivered on cable television. It was not constructed through naval blockades of internationally recognized waterways. It was not maintained by a president circulating divine self-imagery on social media while his religious leadership condemns him publicly and his aviators are lost over hostile territory. It was built on something considerably more durable than any of that. It was built on the credibility that accumulates when a nation consistently does what it commits to doing and commits only to what it intends to do, when the distance between stated intention and demonstrated action remains reliably narrow, when allies can construct their own security calculations on the assumption that American guarantees carry weight, that credibility is what is genuinely being blockaded right now, not the Strait of Hormuz, not Iranian shipping lanes, not Persian Gulf energy flows, America's word. And unlike a naval blockade, credibility once surrendered does not get lifted by executive announcement. It does not get restored by a Fox News appearance. It does not return because the domestic political pressure eventually makes continuation too costly. It rebuilds slowly over years through consistent demonstrated behavior, the precise opposite of everything this moment represents. Drop your prediction in the comments below. Which of the three unfolds first, the domestic fuel price revolt, the Chinese vessel crossing, or the quiet strategic retreat dressed as victory? Tell me your assessment. I read every response. If this breakdown delivered a framework the mainstream coverage withheld a way of understanding what is actually operating beneath the surface of these headlines, then subscribe. Because the next analysis goes somewhere this one did not reach, and you will want to be there when it arrives. Stay sharp. Stay informed.